born, Emmanuel, God with us, revealing us, this church is called Emmanuel. Emmanuel, Emmanuel, this church is called Emmanuel. God with us, revealing us, this church is called Emmanuel. This church is called Emmanuel. God with us, revealing us, this church is called Emmanuel. This church is called Emmanuel. God with us, revealing us. This church is called Emmanuel. Emmanuel. This church is called Emmanuel. God with us, revealing us. This church is called Emmanuel.
Good evening to everyone. We are about to get started. We are getting started. We're going to first have a devotional session by Brother Viandre Edwards, one of our young men here at Emmanuel Congregation. So over to you, Brother Edwards.
Good evening, all. As we continue to trust God in this difficult time, transforming obstacles into opportunities, we stand as we sing the hymn, Simply Trusting Every Day. Simply trusting every day, trusting through the stormy way, even when my faith is small. Trust in Jesus, that is all. Trusting as the moments fly, trusting as the days goes by. Trust in Him whatever befall. Trust in Jesus, that is all. Brightly though His Spirit shine into His poor heart of mine, while He leads I cannot fall. Trust in Jesus, that is all. Trusting as the moments fly, trusting as the days goes by. Trust in Him whatever befall. Trust in Jesus, that is all. Singing if my way be clear, praying if the path be there, if a danger for Him call. Trust in Jesus, that is all. Trusting as the moments fly, trusting as the days goes by. Trust in Him whatever befall. Trust in Jesus, that is all. Trust in Him while life shall last. Trust in Him till earth is past, till His gracious advent call. Trust in Jesus, that is all. Trusting as the moments fly, trusting as the days goes by. Trust in Him whatever befall. Trust in Jesus, that is all. What a mighty God we serve. What a mighty God we serve. Angels bow before Him, heaven and earth adore Him. What a mighty God we serve. Sing what a mighty God we serve. What a mighty God we serve. Angels bow before Him, heaven and earth adore Him. What a mighty God we serve. Sing one more time, oh yes, what a mighty God we serve. What a mighty God we serve. Angels bow before Him, heaven and earth adore Him. What a mighty God we serve. Say things are getting better. Things are getting better. We have to declare it. For the Lord is on my side. Things are getting better. Getting better for you. Getting better for me. Things are getting better. Things are getting better. Things are getting better. For the Lord is on my side. Things are getting better for you, getting better for me. Sing, hear my cry, oh Lord. Attend unto my prayer. From the end of the earth, when I cry unto thee. So when my heart is overwhelmed, lead me to the rock that is higher than I. That is higher than I. For thou hast been a shelter, for thou hast been a shelter for me, and a strong tower, from the enemy. Oh, when my heart is overwhelmed, lead me to the rock that is higher than I. That is higher than I. It's higher than I. That is higher than I. These songs are imploring us to continue to trust God, even in the face of this COVID-19 pandemic. That is the topic of this evening discussion. And we have to always remember that we have to invoke God in every single thing that we do, whether it's good, whether it's bad. And so I chose a passage of scripture to read this evening, and it is Psalms 9, verse 7 to 10. It says, "But the Lord sits enthroned forever. He has established his throne for judgment. He judges the world with righteousness. He judges the peoples with equity. The Lord is a stronghold for the oppressed, a stronghold in times of trouble. And those who know your name put their trust in you, for you, O Lord, have not forsaken those who seek you." So this scripture is reminding us that once we seek God, we don't have to worry about all these troubles that we are going through. Let us pray. Omnipotent Father and God of solutions, we come before you this evening, trusting you in these difficult times. We are grateful and thankful for your mercy towards us and for your miraculous power poured out to us. As we aim to transform obstacles into opportunities, we bring our discussion before you this evening, God. We pray, Father, that as we discuss the impact of COVID-19 pandemic on young people this evening, you will guide the minds and the words of every panelist and the moderator and give them the discernment, dear Father, to have a discussion which will lead to solutions according to your will. We pray also for listening ears, that when all is said and done here this evening, the words will not fall on deaf ears, but will ignite a flame in the spirit of every person here this evening to do your will. This we pray in no other name but the mighty name of Jesus. Amen. That's it.
Thank you, Brother Edwards. Let's put our hands for Brother Edwards. Very inspiring. I think we already have 2 preachers on the plan for next year, God's willing, when we are assigning preachers for Men's Lord's Day. The first one is Brother Hope, who was our guest speaker on Tuesday evening. And the second one is Brother Viandre, who led us in devotion so ably this evening. I am delighted to welcome all of you to tonight's event. It's the fourth activity so far for Men's Week, Methodist Men's Week 2022. We started off on Sunday with our exchange of pulpits between St. Kitts and Nevis in three congregations, and all the congregations, of course, in the pulpit across the district, the conference area, were filled by men, males, from the Methodist Church, and I'm certain in some areas, some other congregations, other denominations. We had our opening service on Sunday evening, and our preacher is here. We'd like to welcome her, especially Sister Irish. And for the whole week, yes, we may give her a round of applause. For the whole week, I'm reminding myself that the battle is not mine. The battle is not ours, it's the Lord's. I think I have a good slogan to go into some of my meetings in the Ministry of Education going forward for the rest of this academic year. Yes, Mrs. Mason? Yes, the battle is not ours. The battle is not the PS's own. It's the Lord's. Yes, Mrs. Hunkins? I'm delighted to acknowledge our ministerial staff. Our superintendent this evening is here, Reverend Mark Christmas, and his wife, who is also ministerial staff, Reverend Stasia. We are very delighted to have you, and their son. Is this the eldest one? Okay, so he's almost in the ranks of men. We have Reverend Hunkins and Mrs. Hunkins and Jerome, and we have Reverend Barbara Lake. We're very happy to see you, Reverend Barbara, that you have come to show your support for the men. On Tuesday evening, we had 3 female ministers supporting the men. Yes, we were happy to have them. Yes. And those of us who are old enough, we would remember when the male ministers, when we had no female ministers, and the male ministers would have had to go into Women's League to do likewise to support the women. We are delighted to welcome all of you, especially our young persons. We don't have a whole lot of them. We hope that we have more of them online than here, but we have a number of them operating the system. We have a number of young people helping us to get this to the world. So put the hands together for the young people. This is their thing. That's what they do. So we are very happy to have them. Now, you didn't come to listen to me talk all these stuff tonight, so we need to get on with the business at hand. I will introduce to you the moderator, who will in turn introduce the panel. So we have chosen to look at the topic, the impact of the pandemic on our young people. Maybe it will take us, the older ones, to tell them, well, look, you're being impacted in this way. If they can't figure it out, then we're going to have to tell them that they're being impacted, because maybe they don't see it as an impact. And so we endeavored to get 2 young persons, a male and a female, 2 adults, a male and a female, to lead us to this exercise this evening. Laverne Keynes is a graduate of the University of the West Indies. A certified paralegal, she was a civil servant for many years attached to the Supreme Court Registry. She has worked in senior management at cable and wireless line in many capacities, including Vice President of Corporate Communications and Marketing. She is currently a director in the CNC group of companies with responsibilities for marketing and human resources. She's the executive producer and host of The Marketplace, a half-hour television marketing program which gives businesses an opportunity to sell their products or services to local and diaspora audiences. In 2017, she received certification as an image consultant from the London Image Institute, following which she formed a training company called the Protocol and Personal Branding Professionals Incorporated. I would read it again. The Protocol and Personal Branding Professionals Incorporated. The company has conducted workshops in protocol and etiquette training for local clients, including the Cable, the Ministry of Education, the Rotary Club of Layamiga, TDC, and the St. Kitts Tourism Authority. Lavon considers herself a community activist and is a charter member and past president of the Rotary Club of Layamiga. She is also a Paul Harris Fellow. In February 2021, she was elected to serve as vice president of the board of the St. Christopher National Trust. She is an elected member of the Supervisory and Control Committee of First Federal Cooperative Credit Union and serves as the committee's secretary. She has been a guest lecturer at the Jenkins and CFBC Leadership Training course on the topic Office Decorum for Today's Professionals for the past 6 years. This is not on the paper, but I need to say it. Mr. Hodge was a grade 6 teacher. Put your hands together and welcome Lavon Saunders. You may come. I am Lavon. Of course, I'm not going to pass up an opportunity to big up my grade 6 students. Valerie was one of them too, yes. So I turn up, this is your microphone, Madam Moderator.
Thank you. Good evening, everyone. Permit me to adopt the protocol that my grade 6 teacher just established. He never fails to remind everyone that he taught me in grade 6. I am grateful for the opportunity to come back to my hometown, a place which I love so dearly, a place which made me who I am today. And I'm one of those Sandy Pointers that, like so many of us, who I am extremely proud of my foundation in Sandy Point. And so, although I'm not a Methodist, I almost became a Methodist though, because my mother was christened a Methodist in Nevis. And I think had it not been for the distance that she settled, because she was in a vision, and had it not been for the distance that she had to settle from the Methodist church, I perhaps would have become a Methodist. So it was easier for her to take us to Anglican, which was closer, and so we were Christian Anglicans. But I think had it not been for that, I perhaps would have become a Methodist. So I consider myself a little bit of a Methodist because she was baptized a Methodist, christened a Methodist. So I'm very happy to share in this discussion this evening as moderator. And I want to now introduce the panelists. And I take it that as I introduce them, you would come forward and take your seat as well. Mr. Hodge has just indicated it is a good mix of adults and youth, male and female, so it's quite a balance. And so I want to introduce you to our first panelist, Ms. Tishana S. Dale. Tishana is a 2015 graduate of the Charles E. Mill Secondary School. She hails from the village of St. Paul's. She is an active and ardent member of her church, the St. Paul's Methodist Church. She is proud and blessed to be a worship leader and looks forward to lead worship in an enthusiastic manner. Tishana's hobbies include singing and dancing. She is such a talented and gifted dancer that one day she sees herself establishing a dance class within the community. At present, she works at Blue Water Safari. She has a passion for sales and marketing. Her goal is to acquire skills in these areas that she can use as an entrepreneur in establishing her own business. So again, please help us to welcome Tishana. And then the first adult panelist is Mr. Gerald Connor, good evening. Mr. Connor grew up in the village of St. Paul's and attended the St. Joseph Primary School in Newtown, and then migrated to the United States at the age of 10 and attended the Thurman L. Milner School and Fox Middle School in Hartford, Connecticut. Upon returning to St. Kitts, he attended the Academy School and then the Sandy Point High School. Upon completion of his secondary education, he returned to the Sandy Point High School as a teacher, where he taught for 2 years from 1999 to 2001. He then attended Lindenwood University to pursue a degree in human resource management. But after taking the first social work class, he found it interesting and changed his major to social work, thereafter obtaining a Bachelor of Arts degree in social work. He is an officer of the St. Kitts and Nevis Defense Force Reserves, a graduate of the Western Hemisphere Institute for Security Corporation, where he has received a diploma, a graduate of the Caribbean Junior Command and Staff College. Again, he has obtained a diploma from that institution and is currently pursuing his master's degree in criminal justice, policy, and administration. In 2005, he joined the Department of Probation and Child Protection Services as a probation officer. He has worked in the area of child protection for 16 years and is presently the director of the department. So again, help us to welcome Mr. Connor. And we're going to go again to the second youth who is on the panel, Mr. Vikel Edwards Douglas. And Vikel is a member of numerous non-profit organizations, including the St. Kitts National Youth Parliament Association, also known as CNIPA, where he serves as the assistant treasurer and the chair of the volunteer committee. He is a member of the Second St. Kitts Boys Brigade and serves on the Regional Boys Brigade Executive as the PRO. Additionally, he acts as an ambassador for his country, St. Kitts and Nevis, and has traveled regionally and internationally to represent and dialogue with young people and world leaders. Presently, Mr. Edwards Douglas is an educator at the Charles E. Mills Secondary School in Sandy Point, his hometown. As a teacher, he understands that education is one of the most empowering forces in the world. It creates knowledge, builds confidence, and breaks down barriers to opportunity. For children, it is their key to open the door to a better life. All children deserve to receive the precious gift of education. This impactful young man continues to captivate and elevate everything around him with his added personal flair. Again, welcome Mr. Edwards Douglas. And rounding out the panelists tonight is our second female, Nadia Rollins. Nadia began her career as a teacher of history and office administration at the Washington Archibald High School. It was during this time that she developed a love for working with children and young people. While working at the school, she recognized the need for mental health services in the country and decided to pursue a career path where she would be able to help promote the psychological health of individuals and families in St. Kitts. She worked as a guidance counselor at the Washington Archibald High School for 10 years and has now begun a career as a clinical mental health counselor at the National Counseling Center. Ms. Rollins holds a Bachelor's of Arts degree in psychology with a concentration in social relations and a master's degree in clinical mental health counseling. Again, please help me welcome Ms. Rollins and indeed all of the panelists tonight. So I'll remind us again of the the central topic of discussion tonight, which is the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic on young people. And the impact is going to be addressed from the physical aspect, the spiritual aspect, the psychosocial aspect, and education. And I've just read the bios of our panelists, which, in my opinion, give them a deserving seat at the table to join in this discussion tonight. And as the young man said earlier, I'm hoping that it's not just a discussion with data and statistics, which is also relevant, but I hope that there is some solutions that would be shared that can really help us to help our young people. I believe that we have taken for granted that because we are all right in our individual capacities and perhaps in our own families, everybody's all right. And I don't think enough of us have made the time to reach out and check if in fact other people are all right. I personally, when in the early stages of the pandemic, made it my business to contact by phone at least one person every week, including people from Sandy Point who I knew lived by themselves and perhaps, felt lonely, felt anxious. And so I am hoping that all of us as good Christian people in here would have done the same thing as well. And so we're going to move into the discussion this evening. I'm going to allow for the presentations of each of the panelists, beginning with Mr. Esdell, then I'll go to Mr. Connor, then Mr. Douglas Edwards, and finally Ms. Rollins would round out the presentations. Ms. Esdell, sorry. I'm not sure if there is provision for questions from, okay. Right, okay, great. So we're going to start now with the female, the youth female representative on the panel, Tishana Esdale, who is going to share some of the spiritual challenges, I guess, that are part of this whole thing that we're talking about. So over to you, Ms. Esdale.
Good evening, my fellow citizens and residents. Never in all my life did I think that that would have been one of the most dreaded greetings. So let me start over. Good evening, everyone. My name is Tishana Esdale, and I'm here to expound on the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic on the spiritual life of our young people. And I really would have hoped to see much more young people this evening. But I guess you would take home the information, right? You will take home the information to the young people, right? Because that's why you're here? Okay, awesome. So we'll start with some of the negative impact, and I'll end on a high note with the positive impact. So, do you remember a long time ago, we used to sing this song, and you had to do actions with it as well. You had to go around and, hug somebody and, greet them. How does the song go again? Yes, in Jesus. Tell them that you love them in Jesus' name. Everybody, Jesus loves you. Yes. That was some good old days. That feels like so long ago. Man, I miss those days. But with the transition of the new norms of social distancing and the wearing of masks, we had to sort to new ways to fellowship with one another. Church was now in an online setting, Zoom prayer and Bible meeting, elbow greetings, pronouncing the benediction, making no contact, but eye contact. The Lord bless you. The Lord keep you. By keeping your distance. So we had to start to new ways of fellowshipping with one another. But there was still something missing. For many, the inability to attend church physically was difficult and daunting, as fellowshipping with one another was what many of us looked forward to during our time in the house of the Lord. In fact, I surveyed a number of my peers, and 100% of them preferred in-person worship as opposed to online worship. And the Bible tells us where two and three are gathered, his presence is in the midst. But, even if we gather online, his presence is still there, Secondly, with the numerous curfews and lockdown and quarantine and isolation, loneliness snuck in to keep our company. Oftentimes, we forgot that God told us that he will never leave us nor forsake us. So in short, in this area, I'm just saying that, even though, God told us that he'd never leave us nor forsake us, the inability to socialize with one another, we oftentimes felt lonely. For many of us as young people, we feasted on a vast amount of news and social media, and then we gained some extra weight of anxiety, stress, hopelessness, and doubt. But guess what? An important spiritual weight loss supplement is the Word of God. Amen? Amen. I ain't preaching, but I need a response. I need a response from you. And a dose of Philippians 4:6-7. Be anxious for nothing. Now to the positive side. Yet, somewhat surprisingly, there was a positive side, to the COVID-19 pandemic. And for me, I was a person that was addicted to busy. Every church panactician a day. From meeting to meeting, from practice to practice. But my downfall was that I was participating in a lot of these activities. But I barely maintained a proper relationship with God. For example, many of us may have husbands or wives. Think of it this way. You live with your husband, you're cooking, you're cleaning, you're washing, you're doing all of these kind of things to serve your husband, but you have no relationship with him. You don't talk to him. At the end of the day, it is not profitable. So the pandemic hit. Lockdown episode 1. It was at this moment I realized how little I actually spent with God. My second realization was that for me, being a busybody was my way of coping with life challenges. Because if I don't have to, face it, I guess it's probably not there. So from work to home to church, doing that every day of the week, that was my way of coping with life's challenges, even before, the pandemic. And then, that's when the pandemic hit, and then you didn't have no choice but to stay home. What do? You can't go out. And I honestly believe that God allowed us this time away from the hustling and bustling of life as a moment of realization, reflection, and revelation. So say it with me. Revelation, reflection, and realization. Just 3 R's. So I personally believe that God used that time to reveal to us the areas in our walk with him that needed improvement. And for me, that was our relationship with him. And I think that many of our young people, and even the adults, could attend to that. How many of you spent a little more time at home, while you were on lockdown, in the Word of God, just spending time in his presence? You can show your hands. Good, thank you. And the amount of time we had during lockdown, I believe that God was allowing us ample time to spend in his presence. We had no excuse whatsoever. We had all that time on our hands. He allowed us this time to realize how much we take for granted. The air that we breathe, our family members. And he allowed us to reflect on who he is, his attributes, the God who is in control. You know, at times, there were many times I wished, like, Lord, why this pandemic? Why? I couldn't wish it away. I had to remember that God was in control. God is my help, and God is my provider, and God is to you whatever it is that, whatever your relationship allows him to, for him to be to you. He could be your comforter, your keeper, your provider, your strength. And in closing, allow me to share a few encouragements. So I did a survey among a number of my peers, and I just want to share a few of them with you, and if you could share them with the young persons, because I really think that it would be helpful. And one of them that really stuck with me is that God is in control. God will fight for you, and you will hold your peace. God is your provider. So just go with that thought. Thank you for listening.
Thank you so much, Tishana. And you're so right. I think in the first lockdown that we experienced, it really caused us to be still and know that he is God and he is in control. In fact, for many of us, we heard birds chirping for the first time. I don't know if you remember the first few days in the lockdown. It was really very still. And that was one of the trending comments that people were making. I'm actually hearing birds chirp in a long time. And perhaps this is exactly what we were called to do, to be still and know that God is in control. And I'm happy that as a young person, as you shared, that it drew you closer to God. I hope that experience carried through to most of your peers, because I was beginning to get a little concerned that our young people were drifting a little bit. And so if it meant that it brought us back to a center, back to acknowledging that God is, he is the absolute, he's everything. I am so happy for your presentation, and I want to hope that those people who are listening, and I perhaps should have welcomed our virtual audience, that they were inspired by your presentation. So thank you so much. And so we're now going to hear from Mr. Connor, who would look at some of the physical challenges that our young people have experienced as a consequence of COVID.
Good evening, everyone. As the madam said, my name is Gerald Connor, and I'm very fortunate to be here this evening in this gathering. It's always a pleasure to see more. It seems as if the ladies are gaining on the men. But I was about to say more men than women, because normally you see, when I go to these things, you normally see more women. So it's glad to see the men are out in their numbers and here this evening to participate, as it is Men Week within the Methodist Church. I'm not a Methodist, but I'm an Anglican. So we share somewhat of the same purpose of devotions. So the COVID didn't start off for me where I was locked down and hearing the birds chirping. It started off a bit chaotic as a member of the Defense Force. Started off a bit chaotic, basically not knowing what's really going on and having to respond to a command center saying that this is what we need to get done. But nonetheless, we are here today and we should be grateful. Now, when we look at some of the challenges that the physical challenges that a lot of young people have dealt with, still dealing with, and still trying to gather themselves from in relation to the physical aspect of it is very challenging because COVID came unannounced, out of nowhere. And what is so funny is that I had returned from the UK in October where I came back and I felt really, really sick. And it impacted me physically. It basically had me wondering what is going on. Even before COVID was declared. So even when COVID was declared, I wonder if I had COVID before. So you could imagine that type of feeling of 1 minute you're out, you're about, you're enjoying your time, you're relaxing with your peers, you're out playing sports, and all of a sudden you're on lockdown. You cannot move, you're restricted. Your body have already become accustomed to being out there, playing sports, being active. And you now have to change your entire lifestyle to cope with being locked down. As older persons within the community, we live in a more of a solitude confined where we don't really do much. Unlike the young lady here who goes to this church function, that church function, and that is how she cope. And that is how a lot of young people cope, by always on the go, always being involved. And they're more energetic. They're more out there, they're more blissful. But then you have to change your lifestyle. You have to change the dynamics. Your body start going through a change because it is no longer having the physicality. For example, even going back to dealing with children in preschool, for example, who are accustomed to go to school and they're running up and down, they're interacting with their friends, and all of a sudden, they're home in an environment where they are not accustomed to. And they cannot run up and down, they cannot develop those muscles that they would like to, and they cannot stretch their legs, as we will say, because they're confined. And that is one of the deficiencies of growth when it comes around to young people. Young people are made to be out there. They're made to enjoy things, run, jump, skip. And if you do not hone those attributes at a very young age and continue to hone them, they're going to have a shortage in development and stuff of that nature. One of the things that I looked at was even persons, young people with disabilities, who rely on daily exercise to make sure that their muscles are moving, they're continuously developing their kinetic muscles, their kinetic energy and their brain and all of that, in order to exist. Because when you have a disability and you have to be out there to ensure that your muscles are moving and stuff of that nature, to be placed in a situation where you are locked down, you can no longer get that exercise that your body needs, you can no longer get that excitement of going and seeing your neighbor or your family. It plays on you, and it puts you in a paranoia where there's so much uncertainties. And when you have uncertainties, you have mental issues. So the physical aspect of an individual, especially during the pandemic, affects every part of their lives. It affects every part of their lives. It's just like someone being placed in a mental institution, or even in prison where you're confined. Your growth and development becomes stunted. And that's basically some of the things that a lot of these young people have been going through, even when it comes around to sports, church activities. Those are things that help to develop individuals. And the pandemic have really, really put a damper on those things, and they have, reduced the development of a lot of our young people and children because of they not being able to be out there physically and enjoy the benefits of the out. So I will leave it there for now. Thank you very much, and I hope that what I said have impacted you and put some food for thought in the whole audience. Thank you.
Thank you for your presentation, Mr. Connor. If you permit me to share as well, I read somewhere that in the heart of COVID, Peloton sales went up. Peloton is this instrument, this exercise equipment that people resorted to using at home because, of course, the gyms were closed, and so people who wanted to still be engaged in physical exercise sought to purchase a lot of this equipment, and so suddenly the sales for Peloton soared. I also heard of a young man who shared a story about him having just received a contract to be paired. He was recruited to a football team somewhere in North America and had his bags packed. He was all excited to travel, and then days before he was due to travel, he was told that everything had ceased. I mean, that the contract went away, and he shared how he went into deep depression because here he was hoping that he would hone his football skills, and of course we know that those young people who get contracted to international sporting organizations actually make some serious money from these contracts, and so he spoke about how he went into such a deep depression because he was hoping that his career in football would have taken off. And so these are really some of the real lived experiences that young people have had as a consequence of COVID. And we really ought to continue to pray for them. One experience that was shared had a young person saying that they just feel like this part of their lives has been robbed, and another reporter described them as the lost generation. But I don't think that they're lost, and I think that all of us in this room who have young people in our presence or who have some opportunity to talk to young people would give them the assurance that all is not lost. So as good Christians, I know that this is something that we would do, because if we lose our young people, we have nothing. So we're going to move along to the third presenter, who is our second youth panelist, who is going to present to us from an educational point of view. So Mr. Douglas Edwards, over to you.
Moderator, fellow panelists, ladies and gentlemen, listening and viewing audience, good evening. A 21st century education is one that responds to the economical, technological, and societal global shifts that are happening at an ever-increasing pace. It is education that will set our children up to succeed in a world where more than half of the jobs they will have over their careers that are not even exist yet to cater to the different needs. In short, it is an education that will provide students with the skills and competencies they would need to thrive in the 21st century. The role of educators such as myself in the 21st century should be helping every student learn how to learn. This can be done through inspiring creativity, encouraging collaboration, expecting and rewarding critical thinking, and teaching children and young people not only how to communicate, but also how to communicate effectively. These are essential skills that students need to develop to thrive in today's and tomorrow's dynamic world. It is quite unfortunate that this untimely and devastating pandemic has made a great portion of all the progress we have made over the last year's relapse. As an educator, it is empirical that this is approached from an educational standpoint due to all the effects being very evident in our education systems currently. We are continually seeing how COVID-19 has deteriorated the physical, spiritual, psychosocial, and even the educational well-being of our youth and young people, our people of this country. Since its outbreak 2 years ago, the COVID-19 pandemic has disrupted education systems globally, affecting the most vulnerable learners the hardest. It has increased inequalities and exacerbated a pre-existing education crisis. School closures have ranged from no closures in a handful of countries to up to more than a full school year. Lack of connectivity and devices excluded at least 1/3 of students from pursuing learning remotely. We have seen students from our very St. Kitts and Nevis who were preparing to study, but were not able to leave Ireland because of the pandemic. Today, despite of the different variants, schools are open in the majority of the countries, including in St. Kitts and Nevis, supported by health and safety protocols and vaccination programs. But the cost stands to be tremendous in terms of learning, losses, health and well-being, and dropouts. Prioritizing education as a public good is crucial to avoid a generational catastrophe and to drive a sustainable recovery. To be more resilient, equitable, and inclusive, education systems must transform, leveraging technology to benefit all learners and building on the innovations and partnerships catalyzed throughout this crisis. Perhaps to the disappointment of some, youth and young people are not generally being sent home to play. The idea is that they continue the education at home in the hope of not missing too much. Families are central to education and are widely agreed to provide major input into a child's learning, as described by our local society. The current global scale expansion in homeschooling might at first thought to be seen quite positively, as likely to be effective, but typically this role is seen as a complement to the input from school. Parents supplement a youth and young person's math learning by practicing counting or highlighting simple math problems in everyday life. Or they illuminate history lessons by highlighting lessons with trips to important museums or monuments. Being the prime driver of learning, even in conjunction with online materials, it is a different question. And while many parents and youth and young people around the world do so successfully, school their children at home, this seems unlikely to generalize over the undivided population. What I can tell you is that homeschooling has surely produced some inspirational moments, some angry moments, some fun moments, and some frustrating moments. It seems very unlikely that it will, on an average, replace the learning loss from our schools thus far. But the bigger point is this. There will likely be substantial disparities between families to the extent to which they can help their children learn. Key differences include the amount of time available to devote to teaching, the non-cognitive skills of the parents, and resources, for example, not being able to have the best access to educational material. And then we look again. Teachers and students are drowning within the pandemic. Teachers and students were struggling with, and some are still struggling with, the challenges of the pandemic. It is happening here and around the world. Now, before we drill down on our personal issues, let us broaden a bit. In New York, schools were so short-staffed that they had to ask teachers experiencing COVID-19 symptoms to return to the classroom. In Chicago, classes resumed after teachers walked off of the job for just a mere week, and teachers in France also followed suit. Now, here in St. Kitts and Nevis, we have not had any near as severe happenings as those. We would have experienced the short staff. We would have struggled to meet the needs of starving educational population of students, but nevertheless, as they adapted, they complained exhausted about the latest pivot back in a lot of cases to promote learning, and a little confused about the matrix being used to push remote or in-person classes. And then there are issues like one teacher highlighted. One thing I want to put out is how shortages of support staff, para-educators, and teachers subs impacts teachers and students. We are aware that we have a shortage of teachers, which means we might have a shortage of subs to no subs at all. So when there are no subs to fill the gap of full-time educators, we ask ourselves, this will then take away from those educators who have to fill the space of sub-teachers. This situation leads to stress and exhausted teachers and youth and young people as well, who then end up physically sick, which perpetuates the problem. Now, let us target the elephant in the room, the world of online learning. Many teachers and young people find online lessons to be very difficult. And we are aware that the Ministry of Education would have provided laptops for some teachers, tablets for students, but once we solve one problem, another problem usually occurs. So now we have the devices, and then there's internet connectivity. Now we have internet connectivity, there is the platform. Now we have the platform, the students can sign into the different platforms, which are now causing different problems. While some have been able to learn and adapt from the first lockdown, many are still struggling to deliver online learning for a number of reasons. Online learning may create a sense of isolation for some youth and young people. Everyone learns in their own manner. Some students possess the ability to work independently, while others find comfort in their community on campus with easy access to teachers or their fellow students. The good news is online virtual classroom platforms have been working to bridge those gaps, creating the feeling of community in the virtual space by producing a series of tools that encourage learners to actively participate in live sessions. But guess what? It still doesn't come up to what a face-to-face education can offer. Online education must support the social aspect of learning to match the effectiveness of traditional classrooms. Can online learning replace face-to-face learning? Do we think online learning can replace face-to-face learning? I don't think so. And of course, our youth and young people don't think so as well. The importance of face-to-face interaction in education, for example, is vital. In-person social interaction has a richness that might feel hard to replicate in the digital world. But when it comes to the corporate world, it is not impossible. Online learning requires self-discipline, and we know how our youth and young people are at present. Piggybacking off of the sentiments above, being part of a community and physically attending classes increases accountability. If a student does not feel they are getting the proper guidance, they may not have enough self-discipline to fully engage in the lesson themselves. Moving to virtual, real-time classes instead of just online courses gives a greater sense of accountability. Tools like live quizzes help assess understanding in real time, while outbreak rooms encourage students to work in groups. These tools help to foster accountability and keep students engaged. At times, we would hear teachers say, I am sure if you were somewhere where they were playing sugar band, that they had no problem with standing up in long hours dancing and palancing. But because it's education, it's a different story. But the truth is, depending on the environment you're a part of, the adrenaline is different, the mindset is different. And of course, just like youth and young people, we have to cater to the different education aspects, the different learning aspects to keep students engaged and engaged for a long period of time. Online learning means more screen time. It is pretty much inevitable in 2022, but sad to say, we spend a frightening amount of time in front of screens. Online learning sadly contributes to this problem. Excessive screen time can lead to all sorts of physical ailments like poor posture or headaches. But it can also be a personal issue to students who struggle with learning from or focusing on screens, especially since the internet is geared to distract students and youth and young people with social media and entertainment just a click away from the learning material. The better online learning platforms and the software out there have all kinds of tools and features to help students stay attentive and engaged. Then we have to look at the laughter and the fun inside a classroom setting is priceless. And it's nothing you can get online. Being able to interact with your students, share a joke, share a laugh. Because imagine you're online, you might share a joke. You have to unmute your mic, laugh, mute your mic. Right? That's ridiculous. But because you have the energy live with you, the students are engaged with you as the teacher with their students, you laugh, you interact, and learning is happening, it's effective. And sometimes, let's say for example, a student might want to fall asleep. they can't hear you, they're sleeping. But if you're in a class, you can say, Johnny, I'm here. And Johnny jumps up, and we're back to learning again. So we also have to factor in these different things. The memories that each student shares today is something real and something they will always remember. The truth is, for many youth and young people, online learning is only a formality and not a real substitute for regular teaching as to face-to-face learning. We are all aware that if we want to improve the quality of education, we need to better use digital technologies, but we also need to provide appropriate support and training to teachers, students, and parents to support the quality of instruction. It is obvious that the situation affects everyone, and everyone needs to come together so that we can overcome the pandemic. However, we must not allow the situation to compromise the quality of learning for those whose hands the future of our country lies. My opinions and suggestions for improving learning within the pandemic. Systematic solutions from the Ministry of Education and Development of Education should develop a well-designed platform with a specific given curriculum, as well as a fair and effective way of assessment. Yes, we might have MS Teams, but there are still some improvements that can be made, especially when it comes to easy access for teachers, for students, and also parents. Because there are some parents who are more of the older age and they don't understand how technology works. So it's a lot difficult for them to teach their children or for their children to teach them how to access the software. And seeing that we're trying to drive ourselves into a technical world, we still need to be able to teach our students not just the way to operate, but the proper way and the easiest ways to operate certain technologies. Then you have vulnerable families should be supported so they have the means to acquire equipment and skills to be able to support their children's learning. Students and young people should be consulted. Future decisions should also take into consideration how students feel, their views, their conditions, and their needs. Students should have access to materials without feeling discriminated against, left to feel helpless, hopeless when they have questions, or unheard of when they have an opinion or a request. Students should be assessed not with numerical grades, rather descriptively. As the situation evolves, a more purposeful approach is definitely required, including representatives from multiple areas in evaluating and sharing experiences about what worked well and what did not work so well. It should consider the problems and solutions faced by students, parents, and teachers, for each of us are a cog in the turning wheel of educational development. Achieve compromise, because the only way for us to push is to work together. And with joint forces, we can see the best results out of our whole situation. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Edwards Douglas, for your presentation on what perhaps was one of the most illuminating experiences that we have had because we're a small island. And I think I understood somebody to say that perhaps St. Kitts and Nevis was one of the few countries in the Caribbean that experienced more classroom learning in spite of what was happening. So I think a lot of commendations really ought to be given to the folks who manage the education sector for the tremendous work that was done during COVID, so that our children were not really left to the wilds of the virtual world. And of course, the playing field is never even when it comes to virtual learning, because not every child, not every home has a laptop or even has internet. And thankfully, there have been a lot of corporate partners in education who either reduced the price, sometimes made access free, to ensure that even those days when children could not learn in a classroom setting, they still had access to education. So I think we were very fortunate in St. Kitts and Nevis where that part of the whole COVID experience is concerned. I want to salute you as a teacher and all the teachers across St. Kitts and Nevis who, made a concerted effort and really embraced the role of change because COVID meant that things were not going to be done in a normal manner. And so personally, I want to tip my hat to everybody involved in education during this most challenging time. Thank you so very much for that presentation and for your solutions which you recommended at the end of your presentation. We would now hear from our final panelist, Ms. Rollins, who would delve into the psychosocial challenges brought about by the impact of COVID.
Good evening, everyone, and let me say thank you for having me join this panel this evening. Now, my task, as you heard, is to speak about the psychosocial impact of the COVID-19 pandemic. So to dive right in, when the World Health Organization declared the COVID outbreak a pandemic back in March 2022, nations around 2020, nations around the globe, including St. Kitts and Nevis, had to adopt various measures to, curb the spread. And this included lockdowns, restrictive movements, travel bans, school closures, etc. Now, unfortunately, a lot of the focus went on the economic impact. And of course, they neglected the psychological impact that the pandemic and all of those measures that I listed would have on everyone, especially the vulnerable groups, such as our young people. Now, our young people are often the forgotten group because we have a way as adults to think young people are resilient. They can bounce back. What are they worrying for? They are not stressed. We start to think about all of those things and say all of those things. Unfortunately, our young people struggle and have struggled with lockdowns and restrictive movements, the closing of schools, etc. So there's lots and lots and lots of areas that I can go into tonight, but I'm just going to look at 5 key life domains. I'm going to look at mental health, social relationships, substance use, decrease in physical activity, and the increase in screen time, and of course, future life expectations. Now, unfortunately, I don't have local statistics, and I wish I did, but in 2020, UNICEF conducted a poll with youths around 9 countries in the region, and what they found was that the children reported an increase in feeling anxious and depressed. What they found was that 27% of the young people that they surveyed in this poll reported feeling anxiety, and 15% reported feeling depressed. Then, coupled with that, we have those young people who had pre-existing psychiatric or psychological conditions, which was worsened by the pandemic. In terms of social relations, as you heard before, our young people are social beings. They like to be out and about. They like to engage in all sorts of things. So the way they had to socialize had to change substantially. Schools, again, as I said before, had to be closed. Physical distancing protocols were established. And even when the lockdown measures were lifted, you found that schools still had to either remain closed, or in the case here, we saw that the Ministry of Education had to adopt a shift system for the larger schools. Now, because of that, peer relationships were disrupted, which led to our young people not feeling connected to their friends. If you ask young people, what did you miss the most during the lockdown? Did you miss school? No. Did you miss the classes? No. Did you miss your teachers? No. So what did you miss? My friends. So they missed the connections and the interactions that they had daily. Believe it or not, young people love to go to school. Even the most badly behaved student would go to school every day, even if it's just to walk the corridors. But it's the interactions that they have with their peers is what they look forward to the most. So that, of course, was disrupted. And especially the younger children, I think Mr. Connor would have mentioned it, those in the preschools and the primary schools, they used to go into school, playing, hugging, all of those things, and that was disrupted. It also causes a disruption in the developmental stages. Now, early childhood stages, preschool stages, that's when they start to discover themselves and begin to interact with persons outside of their homes. They didn't have that. Adolescents and young adults, when they begin to form relationships with others, they couldn't have that. So the restrictions and stuff disrupted, the natural flow of things, how young people develop. It also affected relationships in families. We had the increase in financial insecurity, loss of jobs, confinement-related stress. We cooped up, all of us in the house. Everybody is stressed out. This is the first time you have spent so much time with your children, to be honest. Some persons didn't even know their children, didn't even know their spouse, and those persons in the home. So everybody is now in the home, so we have confinement-related stress. And you find that parents and guardians had their own negative responses, dealing with their own anxieties, dealing with everything else. So you find that relationships just turned upside down in the house. And then, of course, abuse. Everybody is just one word away from getting angry and upset. So you had children who had to endure abuse while in their homes. And of course, there's no school, there's no escape. On the other hand, though, some families took the opportunity to go closer together. They spent more times. I know from my family, we started to watch the Game Show Network together every night. You start to do different things. So connections were built in some homes for some young people. In terms of substance use, the pandemic limited situations where young people would typically consume alcohol and other drugs because they wasn't able to go out, socialize, go to parties, go to these areas where they would normally consume these drugs. However, of course, when restrictions lifted, they of course would have turned to these maladaptive coping mechanisms such as the use of alcohol and marijuana. The decrease in physical activity, and Mr. Connor touched on this as well. The restrictions during the pandemic led to a decrease in physical activity for young people. Now here in the Federation, we saw the cancellation of annual Easter camps, summer camps, track and field events, the inter-school, Rams Primary, football, and other sporting activities. And these are things that the young people looked forward to. So this, of course, led to more sedentary activities like social media use. You found that youths were on their phones 24/7, on the tablets, on the laptops, video games, watching TV. So, and of course, we know that has very negative impacts. Well, some positives as well, but depending on how it is used. Future life expectations, which is a big thing. Youth had to worry about, now, is the world safe? Before that, they didn't even think about if the world was safe. These things didn't cross their minds. But now they had to think of, is the world safe? Is it safe to go outside? Is it safe to go to other places? Is it safe to travel? Then we had those persons who, because of the increase in economic hardships, had to return from universities because there was no funding. Nobody in the home was working to send the money or to pay the tuition. And we had those that actually couldn't go at all. We had young persons who just at the start, they're just in the initial phase of their career and job search. No jobs. So you find that all of this, and even with our athletes as well, who could not compete and couldn't get scholarships, you found that they began to have a more pessimistic outlook on the future, and some just totally gave up. Like, there's nothing else. I don't think I'll ever reach to university. I'm not seeing a way. Nobody is working. I'm not working. I just don't see it happening. And I also want to briefly mention some other impacts. We have, as I said before, the increase in violence, physical and sexual abuse, fear of the vaccine. Young people are afraid of the vaccine as well. It is a real thing. They listen to us as adults, they listen to the conspiracy theories online, and they have a genuine fear of the vaccine. We also have a fear of the virus itself, especially family members would have gotten sick or passed away. And of course, they're bombarded by the panic that is created in the media, panic in their own homes. When they step into the door, the first thing your parents tell you, sanitize your hand, you check your temperature, you feel sick. So they have all of this coming towards them all the time. And although, there were a lot of negatives, of course there were some positives. And, in doing my research, UNICEF also did a research where they had youth talk about their formula. How did they get through? So this is on a more positive side. And I'll just read 2 quotes for you. 17-year-old Christine in Jamaica stated, and I quote, "My formula has been, I have kept myself busy. I have exercised more. I have maintained a great attitude." End of quote. 17-year-old Roberto in Costa Rica stated, "We do not have all the same possibilities to maintain our physical and emotional well-being. That's why I didn't hesitate to ask for help." End of quote. So I'll conclude by saying that although we usually highlight the negative impact of the COVID-19 pandemic, there are still some young persons who were able to manage fairly well and develop themselves both personally and professionally. Some became entrepreneurs, they started to do different things. And as your theme so rightfully said, they transformed obstacles into opportunities. And them taking this positive stance to COVID-19 and, just not looking at the bad side of it and doing things for themselves and developing themselves, of course, has to come from some place. And that is with the necessary support from adults, the necessary support from parents or other places that young people so rightfully need in order to succeed. And that's it for me.
Thank you very much this morning. I think your presentation really brought it home in terms of some of the lived realities that have been experienced by young people as a consequence of COVID. I heard a story of a young man in the UK who had, just before COVID started, had negotiated to buy himself a home at 23 years old. And at that time, the requirement from the bank was to have a 5% deposit on the home. And by the time COVID set in and he returned to the bank, the threshold changed. And so now he could not afford, to purchase the home anymore. And one of the questions that he asked in the interview is that, whither go young people? What is our future? Like you just correctly said, what future can we expect? And it is really for us to give hope and encouragement to our young people when they ask these questions, because as one person has shared, I don't think many of us have realized that the millennials have actually experienced 2 recessions, in 2008, during the recession, and now. And so it's like they are one of the few generations who have gone through 2 back-to-back hardship, if you will. And so, we really ought to do what we can to encourage our young people. So I want to thank all of the panelists for your very enlightening and well-researched presentations. It is now your turn, as you have listened, to ask questions of the panelists. And so I want to throw the floor open. I see there's a microphone here in the middle of the church, so that if you want to ask a question, I suggest you step into the passage, into the aisle, and fire your questions at the panelists. I'm sure they're all ready to hear from you. And nobody should be afraid, because, we're in the house of the Lord, and God has not given us the spirit of fear. Right, Pastor? But if, while you're getting your thoughts together, if I may start off by asking Miss Rollins, if in her experience, in her profession, she has seen a surge in demand for people who needed therapy. And I know in other people, we have this thing that, oh, I'm not telling anybody my business. Because when I tell people my business, I can hear it on the street. And so there is a lack of confidence that we have in professionals like you, Miss Rollins. And so I don't know if you have experienced an upsurge in people wanting your services and how we have dealt with those kind of requests.
Okay, most definitely. When I first joined the counseling center, I myself thought that, people, are opposed to counseling. But what I recognize is that a lot of people come to counseling, believe it or not. And anxiety and depression are some of the top presenting issues that we see. And it's just, we try to make ourselves as available as we can and try to link them to other sources, because a lot of persons don't know that there are so many options out there, private counselors, and other areas that they can get counseling as well. But we most definitely have seen the increase in anxiety and other stuff, COVID-related as well, yes. And COVID-related anxiety, that was, in the initial stages, COVID-related anxiety was one of the top things.
Mr. Hodge, you have a question? Or you're going to the microphone? Okay.
Thank you. Thank you, moderator. I wish to commend all of the panelists for a very energetic presentation. This is the first time I'm actually hearing Tishana present. And there's something in education we call teacher liveliness. I would give you an A+. Teacher liveliness, yes. When Vicky started speaking, I actually jumped. Vicky is a Leeward Islands debater, so he comes across like that. Two things I want to raise. One, loss of learning, and Vicky mentioned that. Now, we may seem that, it may seem to us adults that the children are all right. But in terms of how much material that they would have learned over these last 2 years has been significantly reduced, and especially in the area of K to 2, because these children were not online. They were not given tablets. Apart from those parents who really took the bull by the horn and did their own stuff and got children doing things online, but they would have received paper packets to do stuff. And after a while, the paper packets ran out, and they were not, refilled or supplemented. So that age group, kindergarten to grade 2, they have really lost a lot of learning. And we want parents to be cognizant of this. We want the community to be cognizant of this, because we have to begin to think of ways as to how we're going to try to make up. Practically, some persons are saying that there's no way that we're going to be able to make up this. But I believe that we'll have to put some strategies in place. We might have to introduce the concept of summer school. Yes, summer school, yes. To get some things caught up. So that's one concern. I don't know if Vicky would have any suggestion as to what can be done at the secondary level to help to bridge the gap between what students have learned and what they should have acquired at this time in their schooling. This second point relates more to the psychosocial and to Mr. Connor, because Mr. Connor works as a probation officer. And that was one of the reasons why we reached out to him, not only just to address the physical, but he also has knowledge of social issues that have impacted students. In fact, we have learned in the Ministry of Education, we have received information, we have received knowledge, we have received reports that there have been increase in sexual abuse during the pandemic, right in the homes, where some children were abused by parents, stepfathers or stepmothers, and in some cases, incest, and this has been on the increase during the pandemic. These are reports that we have received. So this is something we also want to bring to the public so that people become aware and persons who might be the culprits could be aware that this information is out there. This information is within certain domains of government and so on. So I just wanted to put those two things on the table.
Thank you, Mr. Hodge. Mr. Douglas, do you want to?
All right. So just this week, believe it or not, I was having a conversation with some colleagues of mine as it pertains to summer school. That we realized that students are behind the curriculum big time. I think we are set back by a year and a half in terms of material. And as much as teachers are trying their best to catch up, students are still falling behind for whatever reason. And we would try our best to encourage students to go home and do extra reading and do extra work, but sometimes it doesn't work. Because even though you would have those students who would go home, or those students who have the driving force, what about those who don't have that driving force? Because some students, believe it or not, they only do work when they're in school. So in some cases, what I did was I would try to dedicate half of my Saturday to do some online learning with my students to catch up, especially for those students who are doing fifth form. So because I wanted difficulty, but because the nature of my subject, agricultural science, there are certain things that the students need to know from a third form level right up to fifth form level to prepare them for their safety subject. And I have 13 students, and from since I started, I would have at least 10 every Saturday. So it shows that they really want to learn. And apart from those students who would have missed, they would message and say, well, teacher, do you have the recording from the session? And I say, I do. So this is what we did, and you can try to catch up. And there are some students who would come to ask for extra work. I have first farmers, just started teaching first farmers. And there's so much I can do with first farmers, especially seeing that we have to practice differentiated learning. And with mixed ability students, I have to cater my lessons to deal with the visual learners, those who work by hand, and even right down to the assignments I give are completely different. So some might have photos, some might not have photos, some might have true and false, some might have structured questions. And then there are some who would finish the work and come and say, teacher, I have something a bit more difficult for me to do, and you would give them and go and practice. Some won't come, but then you would try to encourage the others to try to do as much work as possible, but there's so much we could do. So it's just for us to encourage parents to work with their children, or we'd even encourage right now, we're encouraging the older ones, fourth farmers and fifth farmers, who have extra time to assist the younger students. We have a student council body, and we are now introducing a peer mentorship program where older students can help the first farmers and second farmers as it pertains to schoolwork and that kind of thing. So we give a lot of homework now to prep students for our lessons ahead. So once the homework is done, you're able to go over the homework and quickly move on to the next topic. So that's something we would have started so far. So the summer school is a good idea for some. Might not be, using my summer to teach, but if it's something we have to lean towards to ensure that our children are on par, I think that's something that teachers won't mind sacrificing. I'm hoping, but let's hope it's just something on the paper and see how best we can manage right now before we have to introduce such an initiative.
Thank you, Mr. Edwards. Are there any more questions? Don't tell me we have shy people. There's a lot of teachers in here. Mr.
Yeah.
Oh, yes. Okay.
Good evening, everyone again. And I'm glad that Mr. Hodge brought that up in relation to the whole pandemic. The pandemic basically exposed a lot of things in our system, a lot of weaknesses in our system in terms of reporting, how to deal with a lot of offenses that were reported. And we have to be realistic about what really goes on in our society. Of sexual abuses, emotional abuse. And we have to understand that even speaking about the whole domestic violence itself, that is a form of abuse when it comes around to showing that type of relationship in front of your children. That puts the abuse right at your doorstep when children are experiencing parents in their home fighting, arguing, and even when they're in there because of the pandemic, they're locked down, it becomes more out there. The children see. The children are living with it now, they're experiencing it, and they cannot escape to go anywhere from it. So this is things that came out in the pandemic. Even when it comes out to the sexual abuse, as Mr. Hudson and I spoke a while ago, we had experiences where parents are living in the home. They are locked down. And because of the fact that they're not being sexually active, we had fathers that actually had a sexual intercourse with their own daughters and even got them pregnant. So these are some of the realities that came out of this whole pandemic experience, that there are real serious underlying issues within families, there are real serious underlying issues within the community, there's real serious underlying issues within the federation in itself, that we need to understand how to deal with them, how to cope with them, and how to recognize that something is wrong and who to go and report it to and do something about it.
Thank you, Mr. Connor. On the bright side, however, because this is not all gloom and doom, I have been aware that there have been several young people who have created apps and started their own businesses. People who are using social media to promote and advertise their services. In fact, I used the service of a young lady in recent times who you had to make the appointment online via her Instagram page, and there's even a payment portal online you could have opted to pay. So, you know, I think the time, people had so much time on their hands that the young people in particular took advantage of that time to create opportunities for themselves. And although I don't work for the cable, I want to put a plug in, because in the last several months, I think ending in January this year, the cable actually equipped every community center, all 17 community centers, with free Wi-Fi. And you don't necessarily have to go inside the building to get Wi-Fi. Even sitting on the periphery of the community centers, you can actually get bandwidth enough to do things. And so I want to encourage our young people, because the whole idea is to get people into a mindset where they can become entrepreneurs using technology. And so if our young people have ideas and they think that they can monetize those ideas, impress upon the people in your community to give you access to the community centers so that you can use these locations, these places as outlets to hone, these technology skills to create stuff. I mean, was it Bill Gates or one of these people, one of these rich people started in the garage? And so in spite of all of the challenges that COVID has thrown at us, there's a light at the end of the tunnel where opportunities are concerned using technology. So I'd just like to encourage you to find your community leaders, ask them to give you access to the community centers, and if you can go in a group and impress upon whoever has responsibility that you are using that time to do something constructive. I think that the power is really in the hands of our young people now, where technology is concerned. So I just thought I'd throw this plug in so that if people weren't aware, you can now become aware that that is available. Yes, sir.
I do not know if I missed hearing, but I'm wondering, for those persons or young people who have been infected, I haven't heard if there's a stigma, because whether because the Prime Minister of England had it, the Queen of England, whether that has watered down. Is there any sign of that the children that you're talking about, have they ever received any stigma?
Well, I'll speak from my perspective of being in this school during the first lockdown and stuff and having to be tested, because a student would have been infected. And this is just from hearing other students talk, because they had to bring in, Ministry of Education had to bring in all these students from the various classes, etc. And you will hear them say, you wait till September, you wait till school starts. Because they just felt like, I can't believe this child, I can't believe this classmate of mine would have infected all of us and been all over the place like that. So I know definitely some students had to worry about that, fearful of, if I wonder if I was the one who infected the others, infected my classmates, who infected my students. So I know they were worried about that. And then there were some students who were upset with their classmates for bringing the virus into their classroom as well. But I don't know if you could talk from the school.
From the school standpoint, we know how children can be, and I don't think there's a stigma per se, but children tend to be very playful, so everything's a joke to them, as I would say. So on numerous occasions, some schools would have had to go through the whole testing phase. And for teachers and students alike, we'd be in the line very nervous, wondering if I have the COVID, if I give the COVID to somebody. And the school might go on lockdown or might go on shift for just a period of time, and when we return, you wouldn't hear anybody tease anybody about having the COVID. But if somebody cough, everybody going to rush and run and put on their mask. If somebody does something, they say, remember that's the 6 feet, so you're too close up underneath me and these different things. Because that's how children would operate. But then it would still give them the opportunity to be a bit more careful. So even when teaching, they would say, teacher, you got to have your mask, but I'm saying you have to wear your mask, so when I'm teaching, I can take off mine so you can hear me. So once you protect yourself, you're protecting me as well. Because most of my masks are very thick, so I can't speak in the mask, and after a while, the speaking in the mask allows me to have short breath. So I would ask the students to wear your mask so I can teach, but at intervals, you can take a breath or two here in between there. But that's just about it. The students will be playful with it. Sometimes you might talk to them in the morning assembly about social distancing, the talking, the sharing, and then you're in a class, somebody cough and the children waiting each other's face, just so. And they're hugging up, and that's just how it is. Children will be children.
Well, in the initial phase of the COVID-19 pandemic, I have heard of children or a child being stigmatized, because it was the first phase, so not many persons would have had it in that instance. So to an extent, the child was bullied, whether in the community by some of her peers, for having, she had COVID, that was in the initial stage, but I think it probably blew over once many more persons started getting infected. And from experience, somewhat, I myself had tested positive. Praise the Lord, it wasn't anything severe. I just want to talk about from the point of not the stigma, but the sense of guilt that you feel. Oh my goodness. During that time of me, testing positive for COVID, I was teaching some children a dance. And, once I got back my results, there was this sense of panic. Like, oh my goodness, the children. So that was my concern. So I got tested, so I encouraged the other parents to get their children tested. So not only the panic, there was the guilt. Because the children had to be tested, they now had to spend 2 weeks out of school. But because of this situation with testing and results, the 2 weeks became an entire month. Even a further guilt setting, because some of my family members and friends had to get tested as well. So there was this heavier burden of guilt, like, oh my goodness, I'm responsible for having all these people out of work, out of school, out of, and it was the beginning of the school term. So some of the children missed the beginning of a new school term, so there was that guilt. And then there was the isolation, that I talked about. The loneliness started to creep in. So there was, for me, I experienced a world a whirlwind of emotions, a roller coaster of different feelings, the anxiety, the guilt. And then I had to often remind myself, like, Tijana, it is not your fault. And especially with the long quarantine, I had to remind myself, Tijana, it is not your fault. So, yeah, that was just my experience, not only the sense of stigmatism, but from the sense of having COVID and feeling that guilt and that burden and the weight of having COVID, even though it wasn't my fault. Yeah.
Thank you for sharing that. But I wanted to ask you quickly, though. Thank you, young man. I'll give you a moment just now. But I wanted to ask you if, from your presentation on the spiritual side of it, if you have found that more of your peers have been drawn into a deeper relationship with God, or is it that they did initially, but because we are now seeing a decrease in the numbers, if people have gone back to their old ways?
So I did do based on the survey conducted among the number of my peers, majority of the persons did attest to, drawing even closer to God. But drawing from my own experience, the first phase of the pandemic, I drew so close to God. And I was a bit disappointed in my, let's say, past self, because I'm like, whoa, this is what the presence of God really feels like. But what is I was doing before? And then, restrictions started lifting. We started going back to that sense of new normal. And then I found myself drifting back to that place of being so busy, here, there, everywhere. And I had to take a step back and say, no, I can't go back to that place, because that wasn't a good place. After experiencing, a great relationship with God during that time, I was like, no, I can't go back to that place. So I started trying to manage my time more often, allowed God to be my way of coping, in the pandemic. And I think that is the same based on an individual who I spoke with, in the initial phase of the pandemic. He was saying the same thing. You can't believe that, like, this is how it really feels to have a proper relationship with God. So I think based on that experience, from then until now, my encouragement to myself and the young person is that although we are going back to that sense of that place of new normal, we have to be encouraged and disciplined to maintain that relationship with God.
Thank you so much. Could we get an amen? Amen. Thank you so much.
Good night, church. I just want to speak to two things. I did CXC exams last year, and I would say that our group had it harder than the ones before. Even though Corona came 2020, it impacted us in 2021 harder, seeing as those from 2020 had most of the year to finish up the work and what's not. But us now, we had a whole second and third term taken. And the online learning, I can't blame the teachers because it was new for them. But it was difficult because, as Mr. Edwards said, some subjects, not all, but some subjects, you just can't be online, especially for maths. But, yeah. And the second thing is to the physio-social. I heard you mention a lot of young people turn to some negative stuff. I could tell you that there are more young people doing positive than negative. But I can't wrong you for saying that because people speak based on what they see. And those doing the negative are usually the ones in the house. I must say, those doing the positive are usually the ones in the house. the negative ones are those on the street which you can see, so you can speak to. But there are more young persons into positive and doing more positive stuff than the negative. Yeah.
Thank you for your input, young man. Thank you so much. In fact, I heard another young man in another part of the world who was asking the question whether society would see their certificate as worth any less because it is felt that young people, well, the young people who were doing exams around COVID time probably got a buy here and there. I guess in our situation recently, they didn't have to do long answer questions. Was it? Yeah. And so, he seemed to have asked it from a place of guilt because he felt that he did not want he did not want to stand condemned that the quality of his certificate was any less than anybody else's. And so there's also that burden, I guess, that COVID has cast on our young people. But surely, if you know the material, you'll get it right because you apply yourself. It has nothing to do with the fact that the answers were or the questions were any different. And so I want to commend you for that, for pointing out that, and for encouraging you not to feel any less than those who you think had it easier in the other exams. Thank you so much for sharing that. If we don't have any, okay, here you go.
Good evening, everybody.
Good evening.
Thank you, panelists. I just want to say something. I realized as an educator myself in my school, I had some situation with some of my students. You had one child actually push off another. When you ask him, why did you push off the child? He said, well, teacher, you forget COVID out there, we don't want to catch it. So I couldn't punish him, right? I just had to do some education. So I just wanted to throw that out there. So there's some good out there. Now you don't have any excuses about the dog at my homework. It's about the internet wasn't working. So the children, them are getting very smart with this technology. And then more seriously though, we had some students being demoted. And that troubled them. They had online learning, the first time they were doing virtual lessons, and the performance wasn't as good as it should be, and they were demoted. And that hurt them. And they came to people like me and they told me about it, but there wasn't anything I could do. So be careful when you demote the children then. All right? Mrs. Shannon, first time I'm meeting you. Nice to meet you. Yes. I have something here because what I have recognized with some of my peers, they love the excuse about the COVID keeping them home and away from church. And they got wrapped up in television evangelists. And guess what? I can't get them back into church now. What can we do? They love Joel Elstein. What can we do?
That is a good question. I want to know myself. Man, because...
There are pastors in whom we could always deflect to them.
I think I should. Because honestly, a lot of us, and you could, correct me if I'm wrong. Many of us, put up my hand now. Well, we had a, online service because we got so comfortable. Well, we in service with the stirring the pot. Oh, okay. For the young people, man, there was always a difficulty or a struggle getting them to the church. So I would definitely have to turn this over maybe to one of the ministers. I see Reverend Matt Christmas looking at me, and I have Mrs. Christmas as well, and I think they'll be great candidates to answer this question.
All right, for me, I was reading a study the other day that stated that our generations now, the generation of children now, are getting harder to educate. And it's because, for many different reasons. Then it also stated that online learning is not the most effective of educating children. And they saw that at least within a whole school population, at least 55% of students are failing badly now because of online education. And it goes to, one, the delivery of education, how it's passed over, and I guess the whole interaction, because online education, as much as you try to make it as inviting, doing the same thing over and over and over again isn't always the key to getting students to stick and stay whenever. So we would always encourage students to always do your best, because you might not have the opportunity to fall back on an exam or follow-up. Because some students, they would say, fail ag now, catch it second term. Fail the second term, catch it third term. And then they're going to say, exam is the real thing because exam is promotions. But then again, when you have unprecedented situations like the pandemic, they would put a stop to the exams. Then we have to look back at your term performance to indicate what class we're going to place you in. And we saw that happening a lot. Even when we came back out from when we had our first lockdown, and we encouraged our students to try your best to push for the first term, because the Ministry of Education is saying that we have to try to do as much learning and assessment as possible, because we don't know what can happen again. Then we had our another wave, school closed, second term, same thing, no exams, and then we had to promote students based on performance. And the same students who said, catch the next lap, catch it again, I want to better next, were the ones who were demoted because of their performance. And that's why it's very important to our students to always give 110% as much as possible, because you don't know what can happen and when it can happen.
To know, and thanks, Vikel, to know, I guess to answer the question, a way we can attract more young persons into the church, as my friend here, what's his name, Mr. Connor, I'm putting you on the spot, just reminded me, is that if we noticed, there aren't many young persons present here today, but some of us who are on the panel and who's working the media, a great way of bringing more persons into the church is to create avenues within the church where our young people can thrive. For example, the media team. Young persons nowadays, they love the music within the church. And recently, I must put my church on the spot. The St. Paul's Methodist Church, we have a band now, and that's not something that we had in the past. I remember for many years we just had a drummer, but that didn't suffice. And now we have an entire worship team, of which I'm a part of. So we have a band with musicians and, vocalists, and we are all now up and coming. And I think that area of the Methodist Church especially, it needs work. And it needs for the people of the church to make that investment in the young people. So we have to, the older ones have to show, make us, the younger ones, feel like we matter. I recently went to Kedge Swanston a couple weeks ago for a baby baptism, and many of the pews were empty. They didn't really have music within the church, but an organist, and not many youths. They were just one or a handful of young people. So I think once we make that investment, whether within the church, to get music in the church, because I think that's an area where the young people would definitely love, I think we could see more young persons. So we have to create opportunities, the long and short of it. Create opportunities within the church where the young people could strive. In the music ministry, in the media ministry. There was even two of the older folks within, the Kedge Swanston, trying to maneuver the monitors. So we have to see the areas within the church that needs work and see how best we could incorporate the young persons, because the young people have a lot of ideas. Look at how many businesses came about during the COVID-19 pandemic. So I think once we create that opportunity, or once we invest in our young people, I think that would really help to attract them and bring them back into the church.
Just to give some appreciation to what she said, is that the church plays a very vital role in the community. The church plays a very vital role in bringing young people to on the straight and narrow. And many a time we realize that the church is not living up to what is expected of them. Just today I did a session with various partners within the juvenile justice system. And one of the things that we looked at is basically trying to see how we could get to work with the church more to develop programs to divert children away from crime. And including the pastors and the churches and the different religious organizations, encouraging them, bringing them to the table, to give them ideas and help them on how to bring the church back into the community, back into drawing the young people on the path of serving Christ, the straight and narrow, and giving them something to look forward to as it relates to religion and something to believe in.
Good night. With respect to the child abuse, incest that you all mentioned earlier, how did the government look at this? Is anybody in Sinkis or into the fact that you all may have made certain investigations and get information onto individuals or homes who have committed such offense? Is there anybody being charged for such offense and being imprisoned for that? Because I realize and I observe, since for this pandemic, we have a lot of, because men in particular, in this part of the world, the way we grow up, it seems as if we have less respect for women in terms of getting married. So we find ourselves with more than one women. So because of the pandemic, we were then locked down. And it reached to the point that women being seriously abused, they cannot move to go to another home. So they use that abuse on their children. When the children call upon them, daddy, to do this, because most of the time they are outside, they're being provoked, and they ill-treat the children. And I would like to know if anyone in Sinkits, due to that 2-year service, being imprisoned for such offenses. Thank you.
To speak to that, we work closely with the police. And they're actually persons right now on remand at Her Majesty's Prison waiting trial. We have been working with the various families. We have been giving support to those families. We have even made referral to even the counseling unit where Miss Rollins work at to give support to those families also. So we are doing what we have to do to ensure that these children are protected. And it's all about reporting, because we cannot do anything unless it is reported to us. We have to know. We can't just come up with an idea and say, I believe. We have to know. And, you don't have to come and say or present yourself. There are ways and means that you could do it anonymously. And that is something that we're trying to put in place in relation to allowing persons to report these offenses anonymously. So right now we're actually working on a reporting app where you could go online, download it, and make your report without anyone knowing who you are. Email address, department, and make such reports. Before I leave here, I could give out the email address and numbers if needs to. But we work closely with even education. ensuring that we would speak to the teachers and also ensuring that the school have knowledge of how to deal with these children when they come to school. Because, you know, stigmatizing is out there. And word gets around, saying it is small. And word gets around that you know, these are children who have been involved in certain things. In relation to what you mentioned also, sexual grooming. The pandemic have caused a lot of people to lose work. And you find that a lot of parents, females, because of the situation, the economic situation that they're placed in, the men in the household end up having to, you know, take on the responsibility. They don't want to lose that economic stability that is coming from the male. So they overlook or they intentionally, you know, side look these things that are actually happening to their children because of the fact that they don't want to lose that support that they're getting. And I am glad that I'm here tonight because I will say this and I will continue to say that the church have to play a very vital role in helping these individuals. Have to. The church have to play a vital role in ensuring that you help to protect the nation's children and make reports and provide services, support services within the church unit for these individuals. There's no longer, you know, you drive around and stuff like that. Nowadays, you know, you see all the churches having AC and the windows are closed, the doors are closed. Nobody know what is going on in there Sunday. And you have to chop at those doors. You have to chop at those windows. You have to go out and encourage people to come inside and worship with you. And not just worship, because, you know, some people have their own different beliefs, but interact with them, invite them in, and show them that, hey, we are here to help you. We are here to help the community because you guys play a very, very, very important role in every society in regards to child abuse prevention, dealing with juvenile delinquency, and all of that. So yes, as I said, we have investigated these matters. We have worked closely with the police. We have worked closely with the Ministry of Education and persons that are presently behind bars waiting to be tried with strong evidence to support those cases.
Thank you, Mr. Connor.
Thank you. I commend the panelists for the excellent presentations. Just to respond just a little bit on what Ms. Esdale asked about the whole thing with the church opening up. The programming of the church still exists, and the programs that have been developed for young people still exist. Although throughout the pandemic, we had to go on those lockdowns and those tight securities. But now that everything has been, you know, open as that, the church has opened the doors again for the ministries that can reach out to our children and young people. Before the pandemic, the church was suffering for lack of young people and participation before the pandemic. So we cannot blame the pandemic for what perhaps been happening now because it existed before. What I was hoping that throughout the pandemic and given the situations that we had to deal with, and the cry out of persons, children, young people, and even adults about the need for the church during that time, that now that things have been pitted off in St. Kitts and we can get back to as close as normal, that persons would jump to the opportunities and get into the church as they are too. Sadly enough, that is not happening. Young people, the youth fellowship, I can speak about, you know, as the Methodist Church because I'm the youth minister, and there's children organizations in our congregations, there are youth fellowships, there are choirs, the instrument, musical bands, and the list continues for opportunities for our young people. What we need is parents to be on board. Our teens, our children and our teens are making decisions that they're not going to church, they're not joining an organization in the church, and they're the ones who are deciding that they're not going to come. When it comes to church, when it comes to Sunday school, children are deciding not to come to Sunday school, and the parents just accept it. Mommy, I don't feel like it today. Yes, COVID out there, but I'm not going to go. But however, these same very children are in school, high-fiving each other in the yard before they leave, parents in the car telling them, come, we have to go. But because they did not see another friend from another class for the whole day, they're there and they're high-fiving and they're playing. But when it comes on to the church, they're not attending, and the parents are just accepting it. And here is where it is challenging for the church. For those of us who are in the church, is that it's not just the minister, because sometimes when we speak about the church, we refer what the church is doing and we refer what the minister doing, forgetting that the minister become cook, bottle washer, counselor, everything in one. But then the church is not just the minister, the church is every one of us who come through these doors in order for the ministries to continue. And the parents have to play their role as well. As these ministries are open, we do have the professionalism in the sense of the psychosocial, spiritual, the educational, and physical aspects in the church that are met by the, children as they come. And if we do not get the opportunity as a church to follow up with what we have committed to when those children came for infant baptism as well, then that is saying a lot about us as parents and as the adults now of society. Are we training up our child in the way they should go? And when they're old, they will not depart from it. And I use the opportunity just to tell parents, the church is here, youth fellowships, etc., and to take those opportunities in sending your child to help you as well in the whole development of the children. So that's what we're doing. We're really trying our best, but we have to have parents getting their children through these doors.
Yes. Amen.
Thank you very much. Yes, sir. I think that will be the final question, and then we would wind up tonight. Go ahead, right ahead.
Good night. Very nice discussion, panelists. Enjoyed very much. But just as Reverend Tassia William Christmas was saying, some of that I will intend to say. But first, let me start out to Sister Esdel. It comes down to the parents. The parents, a lot of the parents don't have the regard for the church. And they do not care for their children to go to church. Only when something happens, they want a birth certificate or something else, they find the church. And so the parents have to play a role in the children. They are the ones that govern them in the house, and they have to set the example. And the parents, the type of words that they'll use. I walk the street day by day, and sometimes I shock. I mean, young students smoking ganja, carrying it in the home, Sunday after Sunday, from Monday to Sunday, and not attending church. So it's based on the parents. We have to get to the parents. Even at the Methodist Church, Seton Street, when I go to the church there, I chase a lot of them off of the wall, smoking the ganja. I said, no. And they sometimes, one will say, boy, you look like a police, and they're gone. And so we have to grip with the parents. The parents is what is the problem. We have to get the parents together. We got to teach them, mold them, and explain to them the will of God for their children. Because the young people are missing day by day. When I look around and I see these young people, oh, it grieves my heart. My mother died when I was 18 years old. and my younger siblings, they had to go to church. One night I reach home and I find one of them was not at home and they were having a dance at Sadler's. And I get a piece of stick. I was not the oldest, but I trained from my mother and I trained to rule. I trained to stand for right, even my older brother and sister. And I went to the doorman and I said, I'm looking for somebody. Could you, I'm not going to stay long. I learned that they're there. I know the clothes they have on, so it wouldn't be. And I went in and I lashed up. And every step she go, till Salas to the bed. She walking fast and I walking fast. Whoa! You know? And I told him, let me tell you all something. I'm not going to the courthouse to tell no lie for none of you. I'm not going to hold the testimony to tell no lies, to walk straight. But thank God, none of them, well, as they get older, they get out. You know? But I still instruct them that the will of God is best for them. You know, I just love, sometimes I say I live in the church in the place. Because when I have nothing to do, I just want to be in the church. I just want to praise God. Even when we have Bible study and nobody has come, if the minister is somewhere and thing, I sing, I pray, and I read the Bible. You know? And so the parents, we have to stick to the parents. We have to go after the parents. And then after we go to the parents, I think we'll find it. And before the COVID, it was so. Before this. So it's not really because the COVID come in here. You know? So I thank you all. Very wonderful. God bless you all.
Amen. Thank you so much. I think the night has been fast spent. And we would have to wrap up now. And so I would turn back over to Mr. Hodge. But again, I would like to thank him for giving me the opportunity to moderate this discussion tonight. And I would also like to thank the panelists for your respective presentations and the audience for your lively interaction. I am not sure how many people were following us virtually, but I also want to thank them as well. And let's just prepare ourselves now to be more of an encouragement and support pillar for our young people, so that even in the midst of COVID, they won't lose hope, and they'll understand that after COVID, they'll be live. And so we must encourage them not to lose heart, but to look ahead and to look to the future with encouragement. Thank you so much for this opportunity.
Thank you very much, Madam Moderator. Let's hear it one more time for the panelists and the moderator. This evening, we have decided to give a token of appreciation to our panelists and our moderator as well for the support to Men's Week. And so Reverend Sassy Williams Christmas will be, well, she is presently the minister responsible for men's work, and so she'll be doing the honors this evening in terms of making the presentation. All of the plaques read MCCA Men's Commission St. Kitts Circuit, presented to and the name, distinguished panelist, distinguished moderator, in appreciation of support for Methodist Men's Week panel discussion, 3rd March 2022. So we're going to start with the moderator, and we ask you to receive any photographers. Oh. Sorry. Keynes? Yeah. Yes, Miss Keynes.
Thank you very much for coming to moderate this evening, and may God continue to bless you in all that you do.
Tishana.
continue to grow as a young person in the church, and as you continue to grow in your faith as well. May God just continue to anoint you. You know.
Oh, it's coming on the screen. Yes. Zero.
Thank you very much for sharing with us this evening. It was very inspiring as all the panelists. And may God continue to bless you as you continue to serve in the capacity of as an officer and trying to lead the way when it comes to the whole direction of young people and social as well as other civil things that we have to deal with in our country. Thank you.
Vicky.
Thank you very much, Edward Douglas. Thank you very much for your presentation. It's always a pleasure listening to you as you present and looking as you grow and the impact that you make. And as a teacher, may God continue to bless you and keep you. And thank you very much from a parent to you as a teacher, a parent of 4 boys. And so we thank you for your teaching and what you all have been doing as teachers throughout our country. And may God just continue to bless you in all that you do. Thank you so much. Thank you very much for your presentation on the psychosocial. I know as a social worker and what you do, then it's not easy because when you have to come in, then you have to deal with one client at a time and make decisions on what should be done with that client. And as our young people and as persons who go through the pandemic, we continue to ask God guidance on us mentally. And God will continue to bless and keep you as well, that He also maintain you mentally as well, as we continue to help others in bettering their lives. Thank you.
Thank you, Reverend. We're going to ask the Vice President to do the vote of thanks. But before we call him, I just want to give a shout out to the President, Brother Anthony Jeffers, who is not here physically tonight. He's online, but he has not been well for the last couple of nights. So we ask you to remember him in your prayers and to thank him again for leading the MCCA men walking Sinkis. He's doing a great job. So put your hands together for our president. I just want to add a little appreciation to Ms. Rollins. Just recently, I had to sign a letter to transfer her over to social development, which was one of the hardest letters that I had to sign because she's an excellent worker, staff within education, and I didn't really want to let her go. But at the same time, I wanted to make sure that she was being fulfilled in what she was trained to do as a mental health counselor. I got to work closely with her when she served on the Committee for World Teachers Day. I want to tell you, when we're planning again, you're going to come back to help us in that committee. And I want to add that I am so proud of Mr. Connor here. He was one of my students at Sandy Point High School. Yes. And I always remember when he got his degree, because there were 6 of them from Sandy Point High School, himself and Cindy for Ken. 5 of them came to my hand, and 1 was from the previous headmaster. They were in Missouri. And I got bought a ticket and went down to Missouri, rented a car, stayed in a hotel to support them for their graduation. I put $100 in each card. When I got down there 2 days before, one of them said they didn't show they were going to wait to the graduation, and he got a full suit. And that was because, you know, God, I said this in St. Paul's in Debe on Sunday. God has been good. Right, and he came back and worked with me, yes, as a teacher at Sandy Point High School, yeah. But God has been good, and when we are able to help and assist, we have to do that. So I'm extremely proud of all of you here this evening. Thank you so much, and God, may God continue to bless you. Mr. Vallon, our Vice President, please welcome him. After which we're going to ask Reverend Mark to say the benediction. Well, one of them, pronounce the benediction. Yes.
Good night. Good night, everyone. First, I would like to thank the main commission for a wonderful topic tonight, the impact of COVID-19 pandemic and the young people. Indeed, this topic has really given us a lot of food for thoughts. And indeed, it was an enjoyable one. I also like to thank all of us who have come out this evening to this wonderful panel discussion. First, I would like to thank Brother Deandre for leading us off in the worshiping experience. I want to thank yourself for devotion. I want to thank Ms. Moderator for Laverne Keynes for moderating this panel discussion so ably. We thank you very much for your input as well, not only just moderate, but also give some wonderful input that all of us can learn something from tonight. The panelists, I'd like to thank Sister Tishana from my congregation, the St. Paul's congregation, who dealt with the spiritual aspect of this discussion. And I believe that what you have said tonight, it really will help us to really dig deeper in our own spiritual life so that we can really go out and let other people know, help others to come back into the church between the four walls. I would like to want to thank Kelvis Connor, Gerald Connor, one of my longtime friends from the St. Paul's area again. Thank you very much, sir, for embracing us with your presence tonight, and you dealt with the physical aspect of this the pandemic, what you have done to us physically. I also want to thank Vicky Edwards, a young man from this area, Sandy Point Methodist, for embracing us again with the educational aspect of your presentation. Indeed, what a wonderful one as well. And I believe that all of the young people who have listened and who are here, I believe they will really play back the tape to hear a lot, what you have done this evening, the way you're conducting yourself in terms of the presentation. That shows us that you're really a man who debates. And when you went up on the podium there, I said, wow, this is different. But that is something of your caliber. And I want to thank you very much for your presentation. And to Miss Nadia Rollins, the psychosocial personnel. I want to thank you indeed, because I know that there's a number of persons out there who have been challenged physically, psychologically challenged from this pandemic. But there's a lot of good and a lot of bad that came out of it, because one of the things I can say from this pandemic that came is that if it wasn't for the pandemic, I would not have finished my second phase of my house. I wouldn't have done that. I was so busy going around doing other work, but it slowed me down a bit. And I really want to thank, not the pandemic basically, for coming, but I thank God that you have given me the opportunity to finish the second phase of my home. To God be the glory. And I want to thank you, the audience. Indeed, you have came out here and you have showed us support time and time again, especially the ladies. You know, the ladies really have to be commended. You know, I was wondering, because as a young man in the community, I have a passion for young people as well, and trying my best to cope along with the other men in the congregation. In fact, I have decided that I want to start a men's fellowship in our congregation. We had one but fell apart, and I want to revive one again, so I'll try to do that. And of course, yes, so I really want to thank the ladies. I want to thank the Men's Commission. Mr. Hodge spoke about our leader, Mr. Jeffords. Indeed, we have a wonderful team, and I believe that we are doing well. We mean well. We meet time and time again to plan these activities, and really and truly, we try our best to include men, a lot of men in the community, because when we look on the street corners, we see our young men and the older men, they are out on the street, by the bars, drinking, smoking, and having fun, and the church is empty. And we can see the evidence tonight, all right? I want to thank you very much, all of you, for coming out this evening, and I pray that God will continue to bless each and every one of us as we go back to our several home. God bless you, and thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President. Just two other things. We want to remind you of the cricket match on Saturday at the virtual playing field. Please come out and support. I imagine you would get information from the person who is organizing at the zonal level, all right? And then we also want to remind you of the concert on the 27th of March at Wesley at 5:30. It's $25 by ticket, so we want you to encourage you to get your tickets. We have tickets on sale at $25, and you're required to get a ticket to get in. We are going to invite Sister Wade to come and receive this bouquet for serving us so well on Sunday at the open day service in Deep Bay. Show your appreciation. Thank you, Sister Wade, for your ministry, and may God continue to strengthen you. Yes. I think the Vice President had something else to add.
Yes. How can I forget the media team for bringing us this panel discussion live and lively? The media team from the Emmanuel Methodist Church and the Circuit Media team in collaboration. We want to thank you very much for your support over the past weeks, and I pray that you will go from strength to strength as you continue to do this in the Master's Vineyard. Thank you very much.
Good night to my brothers and sisters in Christ, present and viewing. I will ask us to stand as we pronounce the benediction. God of possibilities, you have been with us for the past few nights, even tonight, as we discussed effects of the pandemic thus far on our youth, our children. We bring down now the curtains on this evening, and as we now leave SP where the best be, we go with you. God, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, your presence going with us, granting us traveling mercies, your faithfulness we experience from day to day. Through Jesus Christ we pray. Amen. Travel safely.